So you know that the state of Nebraska voted to abolish the death penalty last week. Super contentious vote, down to the wire. The governor vetoed the repeal. The legislature overrode the veto. Death penalty has been seen as a liberal issue, but Nebraska is a conservative state. It was Republican legislators who provided the votes to actually get rid of the death penalty. Fascinating story, right? This is not a dog bites man story. This is a man bites dog story. It's led to all sorts of think PC national coverage, like this cover story in Time magazine, The Last Execution. It's a big national story, not just that Nebraska did this, but what it means for the country that they did it. Why conservatives are shunning the death penalty. Death penalty activists say Nebraska is the first domino. The Washington Post today, the death penalty abolition movement is not limited to Nebraska. So yes, this super unexpected, super interesting turn in that one legislature has put a big national spotlight on Nebraska and what they did and what it means for the death penalty overall in this country, which is great. But here's the thing. This fascinating thing that just happened in Nebraska, it's still happening in Nebraska, and it's turning into a whole different kind of story. So while the Nebraska legislature was repealing the death penalty last week, the governor of the state, Pete Ricketts, said if anyone was going to vote to abolish the death penalty because it seemed like the process was too broken in that state, that the state just didn't have an easy way to carry out lethal injections anymore. He said, don't worry about that part of it. I have solved those problems. Nebraska's method of execution is supposed to be lethal injection. Even though lots of states can't get the right drugs to do that anymore, Governor Ricketts said he had solved that problem. He'd put in an order for lethal injection drugs to be shipped to Nebraska from India. Turns out, though, that the drug the governor ordered from India is actually illegal to import into the United States. It's illegal to import it into the United States from India or from anywhere, which we first reported last week and which John Oliver turned into pure TV poetry on his show this weekend.
Now, interestingly, one of the reasons lawmakers voted to repeal the death penalty was purely practical, as it's become increasingly difficult to obtain the necessary drugs for executions. And watch how Ricketts tried to overcome that objection.
Yesterday, Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts announced the state has successfully purchased drugs to administer the death penalty.
So he's essentially saying, hey guys, great news, I found the murder drugs that I've been looking for. How is that good news, you unpeeled, hard-boiled egg with teeth? But it turned out anyway, his plan was a little flawed. First, the drugs he found were located in India and cost nearly $55,000 in taxpayer money. And that's expensive. We are talking Adderall in the Yale Library during finals week expensive. And secondly, there was this.
The FDA tells us, quote, with very limited exceptions, which do not apply here, it is unlawful to import this drug, and FDA would refuse its admission into the United States.
And that is pathetic. Because saying that you've got access to high-quality drugs from India and then not being able to deliver is embarrassing enough when you're a high school junior trying to get into your prom date's pants. It is downright humiliating when you are the adult governor of a state trying to desperately kill people, you dollar store Lex Luthor.
John Oliver. So, at the end of last week, after the legislature in his state abolished the death penalty, the governor of Nebraska vowed that the last 10 guys on death row in Nebraska would still be killed by Nebraska anyway. He said he would get that lethal injection drug that he ordered. He would get that drug into his state, even though the FDA says importing that drug into his state would be against the law.
Certainly, we would hope that the drugs arrive as soon as possible. But again, these things take time, and as we have more information, we'll share it with you. No, we have no plans to return the drugs. Our plans are to proceed with the executions.
We're proceeding with the executions. I know that there is drama here and a lot to discuss here about the death penalty and the morality of the death penalty, the fragile legality of capital punishment as a concept, and lethal injection in particular. But aside from all that, in the specific, this is now a whole different thing. I mean, the feds say you can't import this drug. It's illegal. The state of Nebraska says, when you say it's illegal, we can't hear you. We don't, what? We haven't heard that it's illegal. La, 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 la. And so we're going to get those drugs, and we're going to use those drugs to kill these 10 prisoners. So now, here's this kind of cop show thriller, right? Because the FDA says the drugs could be seized at the border if somebody attempts to bring these drugs into the United States. Documents from the guy in India trying to illegally ship these drugs said on April 14th that those drugs would be here in 60 days. Okay, then tick-tock. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows if Nebraska is getting the drugs shipped legally and above board, or at least overtly and above board, in which case the FDA says they will find them and seize them. Or maybe Nebraska has arranged some sort of stealth smuggling operation with taxpayer money to hide the drugs from the FDA and sneak the drugs in illegally. Nebraska, have you hired a mule? And the guy shipping them says he's shipping them to 2 other states besides Nebraska, which would also be illegal for each of those states. So the clock is ticking. This guy says he'd ship this stuff within 60 days. And I mean, what's going to happen to that batch of illegal death penalty drugs that they are trying to get into the United States, that the governor is pledging to get while pledging ignorance of the law that makes them illegal? Will the FDA find the shipment and stop the drugs before they get to Nebraska? If the FDA doesn't stop the drugs and those drugs do get to Nebraska, can Nebraska use those illegal drugs from India to carry out their first lethal injection ever? Right after their state just abolished the death penalty? And what are the legal ramifications for Nebraska officials if they do that with these illegal drugs like they say they want to? And by the way, who are the other 2 states that are also trying to illegally smuggle these drugs into the United States? Is that your governor? Is that your state government doing that with your taxpayer money? How do we find out? It's a caper that's underway right now. Joining us right now is Jennifer Moreno. She's a staff attorney with the Berkeley Death Penalty Clinic at UC Berkeley. Ms. Moreno and her colleagues at Berkeley are trying to find the other states that might be trying to import these death penalty drugs into the country, trying to solve this mystery, racing against the clock to do it. Jennifer Moreno, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
How are you guys going about trying to figure out who might be trying to import this drug besides Nebraska?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that this is not the first time that states have taken this action, that they've sought to import drugs from out of the country. It happened several years ago. A number of states were able to bring drugs into the country, including Nebraska. But I think that we're faced with a bit of a different situation now, and that is over the course of the last few years, a number of states have passed really strict legislation specifically aimed at preventing the public, prisoners, attorneys, the media from having access to where they're getting drugs. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult this time around to figure this problem out. First and foremost, we need to look at the states that are actively carrying out executions or states where there's the will to carry out executions, and then look at those specific regulations or protocols and see which of those states either calls for or would permit the use of that drug. And that's really where we start. And from there, working with attorneys on the ground in those states, it becomes sort of a massive public records project of seeking records from those states, from agencies, perhaps through discovery if there's ongoing litigation in those states. So really right now, we're just sort of mining for information.
So if the FDA says, as they told us unequivocally, that importing this specific drug into the U.S. for lethal injection is against the law, and that if the FDA is aware of somebody trying to do it, they will seize that drug, should we expect that states will essentially try to smuggle it? That they'll try to do it in some way that the FDA won't be alerted? They'll try to sneak it across the border without the feds knowing?
Well, I mean, certainly we've seen that before, and the statement by the FDA and the hope that they would be able to see these drugs as they're trying to enter the country. I mean, that would really show that the system put in place to prevent drugs from entering the country is working. But certainly we've seen states try and go, to sort of extra measures to bring drugs in. We know several years ago, Georgia had them sort of overnighted by a common carrier to avoid Customs and Border Patrol. We know that Arizona broke up payments for foreign drugs into small sort of payment amounts to avoid triggering disclosure requirements under state law.
Wow.
So we know that states are seeking ways around or have in the past sought ways around these federal regulations.
If Nebraska does get these drugs by hook or by crook, even though they're illegal to import into the United States, and they use them to kill somebody, are there legal requirements? Would there be legal ramifications for the officials who did that?
Well, we'd have to look and see the specific circumstances. Certainly we know that Arizona and Georgia were able in the past to use drugs that were found later to be brought in illegally to carry out a couple of executions. And so we'd really have to see the circumstances under which the state brought the drugs in, and if we were able to identify, that before they were used.
Jennifer Moreno, staff attorney with the Berkeley Death Penalty Clinic, intimately involved in this, including trying to figure out kind of who done it in terms of these illegal drugs. Thanks very much for being with us tonight. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much.
It is fascinating. Like, states not only would have to be drug smugglers, Nebraska, you would have to be an illegal drug smuggler in order to do this. And the reason I can feel safe in warning you about that is because drugs have been illegally smuggled by state governments in the past in order to pull off these surreptitious and arguably illegal executions. The death penalty. All right, lots more ahead with us. Stay with us.